Start. Is that okay to talk
Okay.
after this? Okay. Today's daf, the late night, and we have another one tomorrow morning, is Kuf Bet, 102. And so
We got to Bamamai Ukimta
where's that?
and on 102 about the middle of the daf.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I'm going to review a little bit because Rosa didn't get that far. So I'm going to start from a little bit before that. Actually, I'm going to start from the end of daf Kuf Aleph Amud Bet at the word Snan, which you did. It will review for you, Ken, but not for Rosa. So in our initial Mishnah, we had a machloket, and it's very confusing, between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim, about if a person wants to set up a graveyard, right? So they had obviously very different graveyards than what we have, because they buried people in the ground, usually in like crypts, essentially. So you would take, if you turn a page back, you see the beautiful pictures in the Rashbam, that according to the Chachamim, you would have a cave that was 4 by 6 amot, and coming out of that cave would be 3 kuchim. I don't know how to say kuchim in English, maybe.
Well, we translated it, we said they're either cubicles or niches or crypts.
Right. Crypts, niches, these are good things. So you'd have 3 on the top, 2 on the right, 3 on the bottom. That's, as you see here, 8 altogether. And then you had a chatzer in between, and you had a second set of 8 as well. That was according to the Chachamim. Each crevice, each niche has to be 1 amma wide. And there's a debate how tall. The Mishnah doesn't actually talk about it, but probably 7 tefachim tall, or maybe 9 tefachim tall, and 4 amot deep. Okay. In any event, the Rabbi Shimon said, no, it's bigger. It's 8 by 6. And in 8 by 6, you can fit 4, 3, and 4 plus 2 extra. So you get 13 altogether, and you put 4 of these together. So let's go from there. Says the Mishnah. It's not Hatam. There's a Mishnah, which is review for you, Ken. A Mishnah in Mesechet Ohalot, which says, Motzaei meit mushkav b'kidarko. Person is walking down the road.
I think that's in Nazir, not Ohalot.
So it's a Gemara in Nazir, but it's a Mishnah in Ohalot. So we learned it in Nazir recently, a couple months ago, but it is a Mishnah in Mesechet Ohalot in the 16th.
Okay, here it says it's a Mishnah in Nazir, but okay.
Okay, well, I'm not sure who they are, but that's
Sfaria, and that's
Sfaria. Hamotzaei meit mushkav kidarko. Let's say you find a dead body lying. Kidarko means the way a body would normally lie, and that's an important detail, right? And the way a body would normally lie would be laying flat with the face up and the hands crossed over the chest and the legs straight out, because we're assuming that if a person, Sahalacha, that we learned several times already, that if you bury a person in a place, if you have a graveyard, you are not supposed to move that graveyard. But if a person was put somewhere in a temporary way, or they just died and fell on the ground, then they're not koneh that makom, and you can move them. So obviously, if you find a person who's dying and they look like they were in the middle of a war, or they have an arrow or something, then you assume that it wasn't done intentionally. That this person is found and they're just lying flat. So you don't know for sure. That could have been intentional, it could have been awry. So says the Mishnah, no tlo, you're allowed to move that person. You pick them up, take up the bones, and you move it. You have to also take the dirt underneath them. Vet fusato, which means the thing under it. So that's if you find one body. If you find shnayim, if you find 2, that's not a problem either. No tlon vet fisatan. But if you find 3, and this is where it gets relevant to us, top of Daf Kuf Bet Amud Aleph, Matzah Shlosha. Now, if you find 3 bodies, then you have to start assuming that maybe these people were buried together, and this place was designated as a burial spot, and we can't move it. So says the Mishnah, it depends on how close they are to each other. If they're between 4 to 8 amot apart, then you have to assume that this is Haresu Shchunat Kfarot. Then you have to assume this is a neighborhood of Kfarot, so this is a graveyard, as we would call it, and you can't move them. And now the Rashbam points out here, and Tosfos disagrees, but it's a whole debate. This has nothing to do with none of the opinions of our Mishnah make any sense here. That this clearly does not go in like our Mishnah, but that's a side detail, because in our Mishnah we said you need to have 1 amma for each body and an amma between, right? Or not amma between. Here, you clearly don't have that, right? Because if you have 4 amot and 3 bodies, you have 3 amot for the 3 bodies, but you can't have an amma in between. So this Tana clearly holds, maybe like the last Tana in our Mishnah, that it depends on the circumstances, and if it's very firm ground, you can have only 2 tefachs in between. So if you have 1 amma, 2 tefach, 1 amma, 2 tefach, 1 amma, that's 3 amot and 4 tefachim, and you have 1 tefach each on the side. So that's the minimum, and the maximum is 8. So says the Mishnah, if it's between 3 and 8 amot between one edge of these 3 bodies to the other edge, 4 to 8 amot, then you have to assume it's a shkunat kfarot. Ubodek mimeno lahalan esrin amma, and then you have to start searching 20 amot from the body that you found, because if you go backwards to the picture on Daf Kuf Aleph Hamad Aleph, if you measure the caves, one cave is 4 amot plus 4 in the middle plus another 4, which is 18. The other Tana holds 8 plus 4 plus 8, which is 22. We're going to figure out how you got to 20 from 18 and 22, but it's close. Okay, just sit with me for a minute. Trust us that 20 is close to 18 and 22. So you got to check for 20 amot to look for more bodies, and if you find them, then you keep checking. Motzaei echad besof 20 amma. If you see a body at the end of 20, keep checking. Bodek mimenu lahalan, another 20 amot. Sheraglayim ledavar, because this sort of gives you a sense that this is a place where people were buried. Now, however, adds the Mishnah, which is a strange formulation. Ilo metchila matzanu. If you just found one body, then noto, you could have just taken it tfusato, right? Because it's always context dependent. You find one body, you assume it was just placed there by, accident or temporarily, or with the intention of moving it, right? That someone died, they didn't have a place to bury, they didn't have anyone traveling back to their hometown. They put the body here and they said, we're going to move it, in which case you're allowed to move it. So that is the Mishnah in Ohalot, which we also learned in Nazir. Now says the Gemara.
Is that the Mishnah? Because our Mishnah doesn't mention that the body has to be 1 amma in width, and there's 1 amma space between them. So was that in Ohalot? Not in our Mishnah.
So in our Mishnah, it said that according to the Chachamim, you have to have you have 4 by 6 in order to have in a 4 amma space, you can have 2 bodies. In a 6 amma space, you could have 3 bodies. So the question is, why could you only have 2 bodies, right? This is what the Chachamim said. In a 4 amma space, it's 4 by 6. So on one side of 6 amot, you have 3 bodies. On the side of 2 amot, you have 2 bodies. 4 amot, you have 2 bodies. The side of 6 amot, you have another 3. That's 8. So according to our Mishnah, in a 4 amma space, you can only have 2 bodies. According to this Mishnah, in a 4 amma space, you can have 3 bodies. So clearly it disagrees with our Mishnah. Okay.
Right. I'm just saying it doesn't mention the 1 amma per se. That the
Correct, but it says
maybe
2 bodies. No, but
What?
our Mishnah clearly says 2 bodies. So the 1 amma, you're right, is the way the Rashbam adds up how you figure out 2 bodies fit in 4
I
amma.
think we looked at it, but it doesn't. The Mishnah doesn't specifically say 1 amma in between and so forth. That's all.
Correct, but this Mishnah doesn't either. What I just told you is also speculation, right? It doesn't say anything about an amma for a body. Maybe you could squeeze the bodies into half an amma. The bottom line is, our Mishnah says you could have 2 bodies in 4 amot, and this Mishnah says you could have 3 bodies in 4 amot. So there's no question that it disagrees. Now, says the Gemara, Amar Mar, we're not going to focus on that detail though. From 4 to 8, you could have 3 bodies. Money. Now, who is the Tana of this Mishnah, right? So Ira Banan, again, Tosas is bothered by what I'm about to tell you, which is that we already told you it doesn't work according to our Mishnah. But the question here is, it doesn't work about that detail of the Mishnah, but what about the other details of the Mishnah, right? The other details of the Mishnah is that the Chachamim said that a standard antechamber to not antechamber, standard cave of burial
4 by 6
is 4 by 6, and the Chachamim said it's
6 by 8.
Rabbi Shimon said it's 6 by 8. This Mishnah says 4 by 8, right? So ask the Gemara. Money. You're Rabbanan Amri 4 Arba Amud al Sheish 4 by 6. You're Rabbi Shimon Amr Sheish al Shmona 6 by 8. So it's neither one. Answers well, you're right. It's neither one. But there's another opinion. There's a third opinion in another Braita. Lo'olam Rabbi Shimoni, and it's a different Tana who holds a different opinion in Rabbi Shimon. And it's the following Tana Hu Titania. There's another Braita which talks about another detail of finding dead bodies. And this Braita has another very interesting nuance to it. This Braita says, let's say Matzan Ritzufin. Let's say you find bodies that are stacked up right next to each other. Ritzuf means a straight row, right? Meaning there's no real space between them. So instead of having an amma, half an amma, even 2 tfachim, you find one body, maybe even touching. It doesn't have to be touching, but right next to
almost like a mass grave.
So almost like a mass grave. So says the Braita, Ein beinehem, if there isn't between them, meaning you have 3 bodies, and from one edge of one body to the next, you don't have me'arba amot ad shmona yesh lahem tfusa. if you have less than 4, right, or we'll say not less than 4, not 4 to 8, right? So either less than 4, so they're stacked up like in 3 amot, 3 bodies, or you have 3 bodies in 10 amot, right? So they're not actually touching each other, but they're right in a row. Then that's not considered to be a normal tfisat kever, because that's not the normal way you built the kever was you had between 4 to 8 amot. So if it's less than that or more than that, you assumed it was done, like maybe you said it was maybe a massacre and they had to just put a mass grave in, or it was something else. And then says the Braita, which is exactly what the Mishnah said in Olot. Then says the Braita, then yesh lahen tfusa, meaning you have to, when you pick up the body, you're allowed to move it, the bones, I guess. You have to take the dirt under it. But ein lahen shkunat kfarot, that's not considered to be a neighborhood of kfarot. And we're saying now that this goes according to Rabbi Shimon. So this is really the Tanakama, which is the author of the Mishnah that we quoted earlier today. Now the Braita has another opinion, which is another opinion in Rabbi Shimon, that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, who's not Rabbi Shimon, right? He's another Tana. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said, Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon, who is Rabbi Shimon. Stam Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, right? So another Rabbi Shimon said in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai that that's not correct. I don't agree with you. That what you can do is, let's say you have, for example, 5 bodies that you find, and they are 5 amot from end to end. Okay, so there's not 4 amot between any 3 sets of bodies. So you might say that's not a burial. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, ro'inet emtsain ki'ilo einan. You could imagine in that case that the middle bodies are not there, and basically just look at the outside ones. So let's say there's 5. Take number 1, number 3, and number 5, and between number 1, number 3, and number 5, there's 5 amot. That's considered to be a graveyard, and the other 2 might have been added later. Right? Meaning you don't know that all 5 are put there together. Again, this is talking about a situation where it's not the case, right? They're not tied together. They're bones. And this is, it dissolved, everything collapsed. As the Rashbam points out a few times already, our Mishnah talked about burying people in sort of stone or lime. But here, obviously, you're talking about where the lime or stone collapse. You don't find the outline of the grave. You just find dirt, right? There was a big, whatever, as many years had passed, you just find bones. So says Rabbi Shimon in this version, you can imagine that some of the middle bodies are not there, and you just measure from end to end, and therefore it would be a shkunat kfarot. Bashar mitzarfin. Okay, we'll get back to that later. From
We said above, if you exclude the middle bodies, you had 5, and now you remove 2, 3, and 4. So you have 1 and 5.
No, I wouldn't remove all the middle. Some of the middle. I said 2 and 4, but you can remove 2 and 3. It doesn't matter.
Wait, but why can't it just be a
So, but if you were to remove it, he does says a emsaim, a kilu einani. So it could be all of them. Could be.
It can't be all of them. You don't have, because you can't have a shkunat kfarot with only 2
Because the
bodies.
problem is that if that case, then we said earlier that 2 bodies does not
Correct.
consider a grave. You need 3 bodies.
Correct. That's why emsaim doesn't mean all the middle ones. It means some of them. Well, no, but Rosa, the point is that if you have 5 bodies and they're all next to each other, you assume that they weren't put there as a permanent grave. They were put there because it was a mass grave. It was, an attack, and you had to put people on the ground and run away
What if
quickly.
it's 5 in the span of?
The point is that because you didn't separate them the way you normally would separate bodies, you didn't do it as a permanent thing. What Rabbi Shimon is coming to say is that you're making an assumption they were all put there at the same time.
But if it's the correct spacing from one end to the other.
Yeah, but you can't have correct spacing if you have 5 and 5 amot. That's not the correct spacing. Remember, it has to be 3 bodies.
Taking out the middle one's help.
Because 3 bodies have to be between 4 and 8 amot. So if you imagine there's only 3 bodies here, then it's a regular spacing.
Yeah, so it's like, okay.
So that's what
But you have to move the other.
No, you don't move anything. One second. Once it's a kever, you can't touch anything. But also to your point, Ken, you don't know which ones to ignore. Or you can't say, I'm going to move body number 2 or body number 4. You maybe have to assume body number 3 is not real. And so, yeah, of course. Obviously, it depends on the size.
But you have to have at least 3 bodies. Otherwise, it's not a.
Correct. You have to have 3 in the right orientation, the right distance, or it doesn't count. Now, that is the end of that Braita. Now, this is what you got up to yesterday, but again, for us, it's now new.
So are we saying that if we have 5 bodies, and now you count 1, 3, and 5, let's say, does that have to be from 1 to 5, have to be between 4 and 8?
Correct. That's what we're saying. And if from 1 to 5 is less than 4, obviously it's not.
And if it's greater than that, then it would be, let's say if it's 9, then it's not counted as.
Correct. Now, what I just told you is not actually accurate. So let me rephrase it. It's very unlikely that the 8 matters at all here. The 8 adds a lot of confusion, which I'm trying to ignore. Because the reality is that if you have 8, right, in theory, especially if you hold, whatever, I don't want to get too confusing. Let's just keep going. It continues the Gemara. B'mayu kim.
Because if that's the case, it was between 4 and 8.
Right, so I'm
Yeah,
saying the 8 part is really not, it's really the 4 part that we're focusing on.
Okay,
So-
but it does say 4 to 8. But if you,
Correct.
so the question that arises, and we had this discussion yesterday, that from 1 to 3, let's say, and there would, in order for us to be up to 8, you have to have 1 to 3 has to be maybe less than 4, right? And from 3 to 5, less than 4. Otherwise, it's going to be greater than 8 total.
Right. So again, the 8 is not literal. You should take out the word 8. And if you really want to understand it, then the case has to be a different case. Okay. Because the way the Rashbam understands it is that 4 amot is the minimum size for 3 bodies.
Yeah.
8 amot is also an acceptable size for 3 bodies. But you can certainly have 5 bodies in 8 amot according to the Rashbam and still be a graveyard. Because as long as they have 2 tvachim between each one, that's totally fine. Right. The reason that 3 and 8 amot counts is because you assume that you had, 8 amot gives you, I think, 12 plots or something. What? No, 8 amot gives you 7 plots, let's say, or 6 plots, and you planted plot 1, 4, and 6, right? So it's already considered to be a graveyard. But either way,
And then you fill it.
and then you fill it in later, but you didn't yet. Anyways, so says the Gemara today. Let's go from 7 lines from the bottom. B'mayu kimta. Now, the way you explained this Mishnah that we started today's daf with was Kirebi Shimon. But this is going according to Rabbi Shimon. So, Ema Seifa. So let's check out the Seifa, right? Because the Seifa of the Mishnah said, Bodek himenu ulhalan esrim ama. That once you find this body and you've determined that there's a few of them, and you've got to assume that this might be a quote unquote graveyard, you have to check 20 amot away. Now, again, I just told you, as I showed you in the Mishnah, that really that doesn't make any sense, because one opinion in the Mishnah was 18. If you go back again to page Kuf Aleph and you do the math, 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is 18. And the other opinion was 8 plus 6 plus 8, which is 22. So where did you get 20 amot? So ask the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon, 5 lines from the bottom, Esrim Mitartin Havin, it's 22 amot. Rabbanan, if it's Rabbanan, Tam Nisrei Havin, it's 18. So who's of the opinion that you got to measure 20 amot? Either you measure 18 or you measure 22. Answers the Gemara, Lo Lam Rabbanani. No, it's the Rabbanan, who you would think would say 18. But it's Kigon, the Badak Ba'al Chasuna. You check in an angle, right? Remember that the room that the Rabbanan described was 6 by 4. So obviously, if you start on one end of the room and go to the other end, you go 6 amot. But if you go diagonally across the room, it's going to be a larger number. I'm going to tell you that the Gemara assumes that that's going to be 8 amot. Rashbam goes through a very beautiful explanation about why it would be 8 amot. Someone here probably could do math and figure out the exact number, right? But this, remember, is a rectangle, which is 6 by 8. So if you have a rectangle of 6 by 8, what's the diagonal, right? What's the angle? What's called the hypotenuse? Is that what's called? Okay. So now the way the Gemara does this, the Rashbam does this I love this Rashbam, very cleverly. Maybe it's Tosfot, but anyways, one of them we showed him do this. That the Gemara said yesterday, which if Rosa wasn't there, but you I sure did, Ken, that the ratio the Gemara generally uses for a hypotenuse is 1.4. Okay, which is very close. I think it's 1.4.
Well, no, not generally. That's in the case where there's 1 amma by 1 amma. Then the hypotenuse is 1.4.
If you have a square, sorry, I should be very clear, it's 1.4 times. So if you have a square 5 by 5, then the hypotenuse is going to be 5 times 1 times 4 over 10, which is 7, to be exact. Okay, it works out well by 5 by 5. So now the Rashbam says something very interesting. He says,
but if it's 1 and 1, and then the hypotenuse is 1.4 because it's square root of 2.
Right, it's 1.4. So I'm saying that's the Gemara assumes that if it's a square.
The Gemara says it's 1 2/5.
Right, which is 1.4.
Right.
So yeah, so 1.4, which I think the real one is 1.41 something or another. Anyways, it's very close.
Well, it's 1.4 squared is 1.96. So it's very close.
What's the square root of whatever? Okay, whatever.
It's going to be the square root of 2. So, but if you're 1.4 squared is 1.96. So it's very close to 2.
The square root of 2 is 1.41 or something, right?
Something like that, right?
Okay, anyways, the Rashbam says, well, so this of course is not a square, right? This is a
Rectangle.
thank you, a rectangle. So the Rashbam says, well, if you think about a rectangle that's 4 by 6, that's very similar to a square that's 5 by 5.
It's a square.
Right? Because the area of 6 by 4 is 24, and the area of 5 by 5 is 25. So he says, well, since by 5 by 5, the diagonal would be 7, by 6 by 4, the diagonal will be 2 more. So it makes it 8. And he does that math. It's a very nice math. But basically, add 2 amot because you're going through the diagonal. Again, by the real math, it's probably a little bit more than that. But anyway, I don't know if it's a little more or less.
Oh, so then he says it's 7. It's just a little under 7.
Right, but no, but it's 8. You have to add
Maybe
2
it's 7.
amot.
No. It would be if you have 5 by 5, then if it was a
understand, but-
square, it would just be a touch under 7.
So according to the Gemara, if it's 5 by 5, it would be exactly 7, right? Because
No,
5
it's not though.
5. Okay, but the Gemara is
It would be 40. That would be 49, but this case it's 50. So it's
So the
just
Gemara, so you add 2 amot in a 5 by 5 thing. So add 2 amot in a 6 by 4, and therefore make it 8 amot. So now that you went diagonally, you have to add 2 amot, and therefore the Chachamim started with 18 amot. Add 2, and you get to 20. So that's how we got to 20. Ask the Gemara that you're being a little bit facetious here, because how could one side you turn the 6 into 8, and the other side you kept the 6 as 6? If you turn it into 20, you turn it into 22. Ask the Gemara. Let's read that.
now you got 8 by 6, right? And you're saying that the 8
No, you have
becomes
6 by 4.
6 by 4, and then make that 8.
You make that 8, but the
8
question
by 4.
Yeah, it says Gemara, you go into badak ba'al chasuna. You checked in an angle. Says Gemara, well, if you checked one side at an angle, why don't you check the other side at an angle, right? Midaha ba'al chasuna, hanami ba'al chasuna. Why don't you check the other side at an angle also, and turn your other 6 by 4 into 8 also, and then you'd have the same problem we had in the beginning. 8 and 6 is 22. Esther mitarti havya. Says Gemara, well, no, we don't make you check everything. Remember, it's a chumrah to check at an angle because you're checking a larger space. Chada ba'al chasuna amrinan. We say that you check one on an angle, and trei ba'al chasuna lo amrinan. We don't make you check both that way. So basically, according to the Chachamim, it's 20 amot because you check diagonally 8 amot. The middle room is 6. The second room is 6, and that equals 20. Excuse me.
Oh, so you don't check the second room? Is that what he's saying?
Correct.
Just check one room.
By diagonal, no, you have to check the second room straight.
Right. So if I said straight, so
Yeah,
you got
straight.
8 and 6,
And 6.
6 is 20.
Perfect. Turn the page to Daf Kuf Ben Amud Bet. Rav Shesha Bar Ravini Amar says, Rav Shesha Bar Ravini, I got another mental gymnastics I can help you with. The Olam,
Wait, why would you not check the other one side?
because the point is that checking diagonally is a chumrah, right? It's saying that if you check in a straight line, you might miss a body. Now, of course, the Rishonim ask, what do you mean? How could you miss a body, right? Because these bodies fill the room.
Yeah.
So it might be because someone's shorter than someone else, right? The first body was 4 amot long. The second one was a kid and was shorter. And therefore you went straight, you missed it. So that's why making you go diagonally is a chumrah, right? The Chazon Ish does ask, why don't you check down the middle? But whatever.
You're checking to see the bodies when you're
Checking to see if you find another body, because you have to have some assumption that there might be another body here.
Oh, but why can't you just check both ways if it's only 20 on?
Anyways, continues the Gemara of Shesha Bar Ravidi Amar on the top of Daf Kuf Bet Amud Bet. L'olam Rabbi Shimon he. It's really Rabbi Shimon. Now Rabbi Shimon said that the room.
Where we talked about the little babies, the Nephilim.
We're about to talk about them again. The room according to Rabbi Shimon is 8 by either 8 by 4 or 8 by 6. Doesn't matter because 8 is the one that matters. So if you're measuring 8 and then 6 and then 8, that's 22. So how can you say you measure 20 amot? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon says that a standard room might be 8 by 6. But if it's a room where you buried babies, it would be a smaller room. And says the Gemara, that's exactly the case. But we quoted earlier from this Gemara. You're talking about nifalim, talking about fetuses that unfortunately was a very common thing for them to die. They buried them, but those rooms could be much smaller because the babies are much smaller. So those rooms only had 6 amot. And so that room had 6 amot, then the middle room is 6, and the last one is 8. That's where, why isn't the last one also maybe for babies? And then it's only 18. Answers the Gemara the same answer, which is that, it's not the most common thing. You would say maybe one room was used for small carcasses, not carcasses is the wrong word, sorry, small
Corpses.
corpses. Thank you. I was looking for that word. Small corpses, but not both. Ask the Gemara
So
now.
what's the calculation now? We've got
So
8.
then, so the first room is 6 because it's really a mini grave room because it's for mini people.
And then 8.
And then the second room is the regular size of 8. So you have 6 in the middle, and then 8 on the other side.
Yeah.
And it's the same 20. Answers now says Gemara points to the top. On a side point, when we're talking about whether you take, again, I'm going to use this example. I'm oversimplifying, I'll admit that, but it's important here. You find 5 bodies together in a 5 amma space. So according to one opinion before the Tanakama, that's not appropriate, right? 5 bodies in 5 amot. There's no 4 amot between 3 bodies, and therefore it's not considered to be a permanent grave, and you can move the bodies. According to Rabbi Shimon, you can imagine that the bodies in the middle are not there. Some of them, okay? Says where that seems to be a contradiction to another opinion, machloket of Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon. For Rami, we ask a contradiction of Rabbanan and Rabbanan, and Rami read Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Shimon. Ditznan, because there's a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Masechet Kilayim, which we've quoted before, that Kerem hanatua apachot mi'arba amot. Let's say the normal way to plant a vineyard was to have 4 amot between rows, okay? Because that, I guess,
It's called Avodat Kerem. You need
Avodat
Avodat Kerem.
Correct, that is correct, I quoted it before, you're right. That allows the grapes to grow and to spread out, so you have to have 4 amot between rows. Let's say you plant them closer. You plant 2 amot. So you have 1 row, 2 amot, you have a second row, and 2 amot later, you have a third row. So it's 4 amot from row 1 to 3, but only 2 amot between each row. So it seems like the same argument. Can you imagine that the middle one is not there, and from 1 to 3 is Avodat Kerem, as you put it? Or do you say the middle one is there and therefore it's not? So we are comparing vineyards to graves here, corpses, okay? Ask the Gemara, the Mishnah says, if you have a vineyard that's planted less than 4 amot between the vines, Rabbi Shimon says, ain't no kerem. Rabbi Shimon here seems to say, you can't ignore the middle one. And the Chachamim omrim, harei ze kerem, that it is a kerem. And ro'ineta emtsaim ki'ilo einan. You imagine that the middle vines are not there. And so that's the exact contradiction to what they just said about the corpses. Kasha drabanan drabanan, kasha Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon. Says Gemara, well, there are obviously differences between vines and bodies. The Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon lo kasha. I would say that there's no necessary contradiction between Rabbi Shimon because hacha.
Awesome.
Yeah, so the box switches it, but I'll read what we have because it's just usually we say hacha. It's the convention the Gemaras usually say here and then you say there, but it's the same answer. Anyways, we'll read what's inside. Hatam, there, if a person planted a vine, they planted the vine intentionally. It doesn't just happen to fall there. So the fact that the person chose to do it there, I don't know why. Maybe they think their vines are going to grow in this land, or maybe they don't even care, right? They're just making it look nice to sell it. Right? But they did it intentionally. So hatam, though not the inchi adaitali akir, people don't plant vines with the intention of getting rid of them, uprooting them. But hacha, by corpses, obviously it was in their time, hopefully not in our time, not an uncommon thing. Zimnim dimit rama le ben hashmashot. Right? There could be times where, let's say it's getting dark, you have to bury the person before dark. You can't get them to the regular burial place. You put the corpse in a other plot, without the intention of keeping it there, because it's not the appropriate plot, and umikri, and it happens, umanchile, and you just place it down there. So therefore, says Rabbi Shimon, thank you, that it could very well be that body is not integral. You didn't mean to put it there. You had a graveyard. You had 3 bodies that are 5 amot apart. But then you had another one that you had to just throw in or put in because you had nowhere else to go right now. And you're going to plan on taking it away. And like often happens, you forgot to take it away, or there was a war and you had to run away. And so that might have been what happened. And Rabbanan nami lo kasha. Similarly, the Rabbanan is not a problem because hacha, again, this is the normal formulation, right? We always say here, the reason the Rabbanan say that, remember, the Rabbanan is the Tanakama of the Batra from before. The reason the Rabbanan say that you can't ignore the middle bodies is kivan de minuvol lo mikri kever. That look, even if you put them there because you just, had to run away. But the reality is that this is not a respectable way to treat corpses. It's not respectable to have a mass grave. It's not respectable to place people very close to somebody else. And because of that, it's not called a grave. It just doesn't have any chashivut as a grave. And therefore, we assume you're going to come and you're going to pick them up and you're going to move them. So we assume it's not permanent. But But by by vineyards, not graveyards, there hatam meimar amar. Look, the guy might say, "I know I can't plant so many vines close to each other, but you know what? I'll see which ones grow nicely, and then I'll uproot the other ones." Meimar amar, hi meinau de shapir. The ones that grow nicely, I'll leave in the ground. Udalo shapir, and the ones that don't grow nicely, they'll be firewood. Right? It's not gonna, if 2 or 3 years from now, these vines are not growing, I'll pull them out and I'll use them for wood. So I still have benefit potentially. Now, let's say you have a small backyard, you can maybe overplant because you don't lose regardless. Maybe they won't be good for vines, but they'll be good for wood.
So
And
you just
therefore,
say it's temporary?
it's not that it's temporary, it's that there's a function, there's a benefit, even if it's not going to be ideal for growing vines, there still is a use of it as wood. But with the bodies, it's not like there's a graveyard you would do this way. You would never do this in a graveyard. And therefore, that's what the Chachamim there say, by vines, it's not a problem. You assume they're not there. And by corpses, you don't say that. Hadron Allah hamocher perot. Continues the Gemara, the next parak. Ha'omer lechavero. Someone says to his friend, Beit kor afar ni mocher lecha. I want to sell you a Beit kor afar. Beit kor, I don't know, Charlie always had the Steinsalz for us. A Beit kor is 30 sa'ah. A sa'ah is 50 by 100, 1,500 square amot. So it's
How
30
much?
times that. Okay,
50 times what?
it's 30 times a Beit sa'ah. A kor is
Yeah.
30 sa'ah.
Right. What's a Beit Sa'ah?
Beit sa'ah is the size of the Mishkan, 50 by 100 amot.
That's 5,000.
50 by 100 is 5,000. Thank you. The 5,000, 50 by 100 is 5,000 amot. And so this is 30 times that. So you could do the math. Okay?
That's large. Large.
It's large. Sorry, I take it.
Whatever. It doesn't-
No, take it back. The Mishkan was 2 sa. This is 15, not 30 times that, 15 times that. So 15 times. A core is 30 sa, right? The Mishkan was satayim, was 2 sa. So this is, and the Mishkan was 50 by 100. So
That's 5,000.
So this is 15 times 5,000. So a large field, right?
It's 15.
15, 1.5 times 5,000. Can you do the math? Your pen doesn't work? Okay.
That is, it's, I thought 30. No, it's nothing.
No, so I said I made a mistake. It's not 30, it's 15. So you sell a Beit core, which is 30 sa.
Well, it says here in Rashbam, Tet Vav Palmayim Mea Al Nun.
Okay, you could do that.
No, that's what it is. Then it's
Right, correct.
15 times
Times.
Mea Al Nun. So okay, that's the Rashbam says it right here.
15 times 5,000, correct. Anyways, you say to your friend, I want to sell you a Beit core of afar. Now, afar, what does afar mean? Dirt, as opposed to rocks or land. So meaning you want to plant on this land. So you make it very clear that you want to plant. So since you made it very clear that you want to plant, ani mocher lecha, hayusham nikaim, if you have, nikaim means like ditches, crevices, basically, like holes that are amukim asarat tfachim, they go down 10 tfachim, which is pretty tall, right? 10 tfachim is 2 amot, so, or almost 2 amot. Anyway, so around 3 or 4 feet, 3 feet, let's say. O slaim gvoim asarat tfachim, or you have rocks that are 10 tfachim tall, then einan nimdadin imo, they don't count as part of the field. Right, so you have to give extra land besides the cracks and the rocks,
Because they want to plant.
because you can't plant in those things. They're not, right? You're not plantable. Pachot mikan. Now, let's say the space is smaller than that, meaning it's less than 10 tefachim deep or less than 10 tefachim high. Then nimdadinimo. Then they do count. Then they're batel to the field. So even if there's a rock that's a foot high, the fact is that counts as part of the field because it's normal in a field to have rocks like that. However, if you say to your friend, Im Amarlo, kid Beit kor afar, you add a ka, around, a ka is an estimation, around the Beit kor afar, then it doesn't matter. Then you can give him a space. Afilo hayusham nikaim amukim yoter me'asar tvachim, even if there's ditches that are more than 10 tvachim deep, or slaim voim yoter me'asar tvachim, or there's rocks that are more than 10 tvachim tall, harei edo nimdadinima, they can be counted and sold as part of the field, because you didn't say, I want a field that's good for planting. You said, I want a field that's around a sa'ah that's good for planting. So it's not exact, and therefore even these rocks would count. We will see in the Gemara there is a limit to how much can be rocks before it's not considered a field anymore. Now, before we get, I'm gonna do a little bit more. It's not a ton. So we have a Mishnah in Masechet Erechim, which we haven't got to in this daf cycle yet, but some people probably learned it last cycle. But the Mishnah in Masechet Erechim is a very fascinating discussion about how you redeem things given to Hektish. If you recall, the Torah in the end of Sefer Vayikra talks about this, and it says that if you give land to Hektish, then you have to redeem the land from Hektish in a way called Zera Chomer Saorim B'Chamishim Shekel Kesef. Now, a Chomer, just to give you context, is the same thing as a core. Now, why we sometimes call it a core, why we sometimes call it a Chomer, it's maybe to keep you on your toes. So the pasuk says that if you give land to Hektish, like anything else you give to Hektish, like if I donate my car to Hektish, I can go to Hektish and I can redeem my car from Hektish. And I just have to give Hektish the value of the car. If I give my shirt to Hektish, I go redeem and give the value of the shirt, you add a fifth, right? But whatever, you give the value. Fields are different. The Torah gives a value for the field. So whether the field is a very fertile field or a very infertile field, every field, the amount of space in the field that can plant a chomer seorim, a chomer of barley, which I didn't mention this point, but no one in our Mishnah talked about barley or grain, but that's a different debate. A chomer of barley, which is the shir in our Mishnah, right? 15 times the chatzar mishkan, 15 times 5,000 amot, whatever that math is. Okay, so anyone who plants, who gives that to the Beit HaMikdash, if they want to redeem it, they have to pay 50 shekel for the Yovel cycle. Now, Yovel cycle, if you recall, is 49 years. So that means if you divide 50 by 49, it's 1 shekel and 1 extra, we call it a punjan, every year. So that means that if you get dedicated to Beit HaMikdash in the first year of the cycle, and 10 years pass, and you want to redeem it, you have to pay 40 times 1 and 1, right? So 40 shekels and 40 punyanot. Because each year you would decrease. 50 is for the whole cycle, but each year less, you pay 1 less, okay? It's worth 1 less. So that is the pasuk, and that's the Gemara. I mean, the pasuk's not so clear, but the Gemara talks all about all.
You're saying you redeem it in the 10th year, right?
Correct. If you redeem in the 10th year, you pay 40. If you redeem in the 30th year, you pay 20, because it has less value till Yovel. Now,
if you pay in it for 49th year, you pay 1, basically.
Correct. If you missed redeeming it, you're in big trouble. Anyway, says the Mishnah, let's say Amakdish Sadeo B'Shata Yovel. You give your Sada to Hektish in the time of Yovel, because if there's no Yovel, this whole thing doesn't apply. Then Notein Lo, you give to them, I mean, you give to the Hektish to redeem it. Libeit Zera, for the amount of space that you can plant Chomer Seorim, a Chomer, which is this measure of a core in our Mishnah, of barley, Chamishim Shekel Kesef, okay, for the whole time. Now, says the Mishnah, just like our Mishnah, if in this field there are ditches that are more than 10 tefachim deep, or you have rocks that are more than 10 tefachim tall, then they don't count as part of the field. And when you redeem that part from the hektish, you don't pay the same proportion, right? So you subtract that from the area that you redeem. Now, the Rashbam points out, as Mark's going to make clear in a second, it's not that they don't belong to hektish. They certainly belong to hektish. It just means, as we're going to see later, that they're not plantable. And since they're not plantable, the way you redeem things that are unplantable is just by their value, right? The only things that have this special halacha of 50 shekel for 49 years are things that you can plant. These spaces are not counted because they're not plantable, okay? It's going to take us a little time to get there, but I'm giving you a head start.
So how much would you pay if it's 50? You deduct the percentage.
You
It's
just
like
do the value.
prorated. It's prorated.
you-
So if it's 10% of the field is not redeemable, so you would ultimately pay 45. Is that it?
Correct. Says we're going to get there too, though. Pachot mikan. Now, if they're smaller than that, meaning it's less than 10 tefachim deep or less than 10 tefachim tall, then nimdadin ima. Then you measure them with the field, and you have to redeem them with the same 50 shekel formula. Ask the Gemara, Amai, but why are you saying that you don't have to redeem them? Again, I gave this away a little bit. Why don't you say liktishuban pe nafshayo? Why don't you say, sure, maybe they're not part of a field, right? Because a planting field doesn't include something that's deep, but why don't they become kodesh on themselves? Meaning, especially, now, this is really not a good question for the stones, but it's especially a question for the ditches, right? Because the whole problem with the ditches, you can plant on a ditch. It just means that you have to get a different plow, you have to make a different arrangement because it's not the same row, basically. So it's essentially a separate field. right? So ask the Gemara, why don't you just say it's Kodesh on itself? And you might say, well, it's because it's too small. The Chitema, maybe Kivadulahavi Beit Kor, Lokachi, that you need to have a minimum size of a core. And since this tiny little ditch is 20 feet by 20 feet, it's not Kodesh. But that's not true. Hatanya, we have a Braita that says, Sadeh, the Torah says the word Sadeh, Matam Alomer, it's extra. The Fisha Nemra, because it already told me Zera, seed, that's Chomer Sorim, that plants a Chomer of barley, B'chamishim shekel kesef, that's what you redeem. Ein li ela shikdish be'inyan hazeh. I only know that you have to redeem from hektish if you give that much. How do I know a smaller amount? Minayin l'rabot letech, which is smaller, and chatzi letech, and half a letech, and sa'ah, and a tarkav, chatzi tarkav, that those also, let's say you only do a sa'ah, which is one, like 200th of this, I think. Talmalomer sadeh mikol makom. And so I'm going to stop here because I don't want to do the whole daf. But basically, you can, even though the shear that Hektish says is 50 shekel for a field that's a core, or as the pasuk uses, a chomer, if you give a field that's half a chomer or half a core, you just pay 25 shekel, right? You can prorate the size just like you prorate the years. So it doesn't make sense to the Gemara at this point why. Well, I'm going to read one more line, right? Why the field itself, oh, sure, you're not makdish it maybe at the same time with the other field, but it should still be hektish, the ditch in the field. And says the Gemara, it is hektish, but it should still be redeemed that way. So Amar Rav Ukva Barachama, maybe I'll read this again tomorrow. Hacha b'nikavim milayim mayim askinan. We have to be talking about holes, ditches that are filled with water. So they're not delav b'nei zriya ninu. They're not able to be planted. So it's not just a ditch that's inconvenient to plant and you can't do it together. It has to physically be impossible. I'm going to stop here because I really don't want to do the whole daf. We'll pick this up tomorrow morning. I'll review this last part, God willing, tomorrow morning because it's not a long daf. And hopefully it's 7:45 a.m. Works for everyone. And Ken, give me a call, okay?
All right.
Good night.
Yes, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, I have a question here. Maybe you can help me.
I can try.
Yeah, I did a few days ago. I got a report. I got a CT chest, a patient of mine with a huge cavitary lesion in the right upper lobe with accompanying lymph nodes that are especially ipsilateral neoplastic nodes, according to the radiologist. And my patient is scheduled to see me this week. I just wonder if I don't do oncology, if you know a lung specialist to which I could possibly refer this patient.
So I know an exceptional lung specialist. I know several, but I know one that's really upset. Is NYU okay? I mean, an insurance issue, or?
I believe so. I have to see the patient, ask, but patient comes to see me at my office right now is Lower Manhattan, and I'm about 2-3 blocks from NYU, so it's possible. But
Absolutely, yeah. So do you want me to text you, email you? What's the best way to?
You could text if you like.
Let me just text you. the
Or you
name.
want, or you
Yeah.
want to email, that's okay too, either way.
I'll text you, I'll send you my email as well, but I mean, they're really good. Look at it as quickly as possible. And you can show you the same day.
Yeah, okay, that's, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me
It's-
send you the rest of the information, okay?
All right, very good.
Okay, take care. Shabbat. I'll see you tomorrow morning. I hope.
Okay, Shana Tova, all right, thank you.
Okay, bye.
there? Who's there? Who is this? Can't see you. Turn on the light. Where'd you buy now?
I didn't.
I didn't ask you that. Where'd you buy it?
I didn't. They're downstairs. You want it or I'll bring it back?
Where'd you get them?
No one.
Did somebody sell property?
No, it's 2025 to July.
It's somebody's property.
Not when they was on the table. I asked the lady.
What lady?
She was going to overgrade. We left. I said, what do you want?
You didn't want them? Wait, a minute, the lady put them down?
No, I don't know who put them down.
How did you get them?
They leave them on the table. They also left the same reason you picked up that soap. They left 3 of those.
Why?
I don't know why. I figured out is the date. It's Best Buy July 2025. Well, now it's October 2025. Yeah. Hold on.
I don't know. You don't bring the product? No. I'm gonna buy it.
Think they're okay?
It's very good. In fact, you can imagine if you decide. They grandfather that saw the software. Maybe fraud. Like I said, I think. Fraud. Open that up, put that. It said, you're not open that site. So. But yeah, I could get one. And George was still not open, and it says security threat, you're not open. It's probably all fraud. But I know, that doesn't make sense, I told that. The bogus phone number too. 647, you know where that is, that area code? You look it up? Area code 647?
Training from the parent.
Oh, mistake, yeah.
Downtown surrounding area.
That's the easy,
Downtown for NRPR, North York, Batra, and Papa, during the region. Area code 416 focus on the telephone code, North American Government Plan, in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. 416 is regional North American code created by American Telephone and Television, 1947. Yes, ma'am. Well, I put on these people, and it's very sad, they have this, turning of the houses, and not now, look, flat, 28. Flat, secondary.
Well, right in the jewel?
I'm saying, not down the door, it's turning its phone.
3 years old.
28, and so what they have there. Yeah, I mean, some of them are trying to speak out, get 28, bomb and I gave them the picture. They have a very nice voice, and they're going through the video. So just some of them, oh, you know, but cats, so how they got on, they can return it over the months. Hard by the small, this is very. Then it's family, it's kind of, representing the market. And even if my mother.
like that, but you mix it down.
It said. Said. It says, cracks on the second day of breakfast, don't have to knock it on the door. And it's a positive, it doesn't say it's down anywhere.
Right.
It's stuck.
For as far away, but I would say, far, but I mean, it's away from. Remember, the small, is yeshiva there, and the shul maybe, but they're not close to facilities. I mean, there is Catskill Regional Hospital, but they have to call someone immediately,
And they have to. Oh,
and they have to find, well, no, but if you have, but they have to find someone with more.
video, it's heavy. It's very heavy.
Very heavy.
Yeah, it is very heavy.
How heavy?
All the way under the phone.
That's it?
Heavy. And the man, more the sword, he said, no. You know. No.
Oh,
What was 528?
so, oh, the down lateral circulation. The lateral coronary circulation. 100 people haven't developed lateral coronary circulation. not, but the person said, I have to stuff is right now.
Oh, you know who's walking down there? Very bad.
Mother, eat your supper?
And still left over. Let them put it on that down.
Well, I asked her, she said, so I asked where you were.
Most of the potato and a little bit of milk. No, a little bit of milk. No, she didn't finish the sweet potato. Yes, if you listen to the messages, I'm not going to put down the order. No, I know.
You on the phone
You
yet?
listen,
Did you finish the phone?
okay, right, and then, if they fall, and they have the book, don't call me back, if not, don't bother,
What?
okay?
What, it's not 10 o'clock at night. You've been on the phone for an hour.
Yeah, I forgot to ask one question, okay? I'm going to get you for the 29.
Finish that. They,
But